Welcome. Today we're going to give a broad introduction to Agile methodologies for business executives, technical project managers, and even systems and software developers. Feel free to visit my website where you can get a hold of all of my Lean and Agile videos, as well as some of my white papers on how to apply these to extremely large and complex U.S. public and private sector programs and projects. I've been in the public sector for about 3.5 decades now. My background is in computer science and information systems. I'm a career systems and software engineering methodologist. My first project was NASA's space station, and I published the first textbooks on the ROI of CMMI, as well as the ROI of Agile methods. So let's talk a little bit about the impetus for Agile methods with a discussion of the Internet of Things, which is a dinosaur killer. The Internet of Things is an extinction level event with tens of billions of devices on the Internet, billions of humans interconnected across the world. This is putting a great pressures on today's businesses in terms of lead and cycle times and global competition, which is making it very, very difficult to compete in today's global economy. So let's continue this discussion of today's whirlwind environment. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the Internet of Things and global competition with extremely demanding customers, immense system complexity, the relentless pace of technological change, reduced budgets, obsolete technology and skills, overburdening legacy systems, poor global IT security, redundant data center, and of course, immensely long lead and cycle times. So we've hinted at the notion of immensely long lead and cycle times. It's directly related to program size. That is immensely large, program scale, scope, and size. And we know historically that the larger a program is, the harder it falls in terms of a large number of uncontrollable defects, large change and turnover and instability, lower productivity, and of course just greater program failure. Another major problem associated with large traditional projects is the notion that most requirements are defective. That is, 75% of system requirements are simply incorrect. Not only that, but the same studies show that well over 75% of these requirements aren't even needed at all. And combined with long lead cycle times, requirements, defects, waste, scale, scope, and size, this causes large number of projects failures as well. We see that globally as well. Over half of global investment in IT projects are lost each year. So Agile methods sort of rose to address some of these challenges. Agility is a property consisting of quickness, lightness, ease of movements, to be very, very nimble, to be responsive to change, to quickly reprioritize, give a fast response, lots of customer interaction, evolutionary incremental iterative delivery to eat the elephant one bite at a time. And when you do these things, you increase both internal and external business value. Agile methods are based on 4 broad values. The first major one is intense customer collaboration versus contract negotiation. Individuals and interactions and teamwork over processes and tools. A focus on working, systems and software instead of documentation, and responding to change as we uncover the requirements instead of following a plan. Traditional projects are based on the iron triangle or triple constraints where scope is fixed and cost and time are variable, but Agile methods flips that notion upside down, and what we do is we fix time and cost into shorter iterations, and we vary the scope in order to reduce lead and cycle times. Agile is really a worldview. It's really a total organizational management, consisting of leadership, organizational change, acquisition and contracting, strategic planning, even program and project management, not just systems development and processes and practices. It also includes tools, technologies. So Agile goes way beyond just, simple, computer programming projects. So how exactly do Agile methods work? Well, in Agile methods, we implement requirements in slices versus layers. That is, one requirement at a time. As we've alluded to earlier, in traditional projects, it's based on implementing an extremely large scope, which leads to large lead and cycle time. But in Agile methods, we implement uh, our highest priority requirements first, making our projects faster, earlier business value, lowering our costs, fewer defects, lower risk, and even better security. So let's talk a little bit about the effects of traditional versus agile projects. In traditional projects, you implement an extremely large scope, and what this does is this freezes processing queues. So it lengthens lead and cycle times, lowers productivity, lowers quality, and lowers program success. But when you implement your system in slices versus layers, what this does is this increases productivity, decreases lead and cycle times, increases quality, productivity, sustainability, happiness, and program success. A family of basic agile methods has emerged over the last 20 or 30 years to embrace these values and principles, such as crystal methods, Scrum, dynamic systems development, feature-driven development, and even extreme programming. However, Scrum has emerged as the dominant market paradigm for embracing these principles at both the project, program, and even organizational level, and is embraced by over 95% of IT projects today. Beyond the basic agile methods on the prior slide, today's focus is really on testing, quality assurance, automation, and really sharply reducing those lead and cycle times and improving quality with test-driven development, continuous integration, behavior-driven development, continuous delivery, DevOps, and even DevOps security. What we're trying to do is we're trying to eliminate or minimize the cost of quality, which represents over 80 to 90% of development costs. While some of the basic agile methods that we've discussed so far focus on smaller teams, today's focus is on larger projects. Hence, a family of agile project management paradigms has emerged, such as radical project management, extreme project management, adaptive, agile project management, even simplified agile project management, which sort of kind of wraps Scrum practices around a simple agile project management paradigm. As we alluded to earlier, agile thinking is really about, total organizational management at all levels, from leadership to acquisition to organizational change. Hence, a family of paradigms for applying agile thinking at the organizational and enterprise and portfolio level has emerged, such as Enterprise Scrum, Scaled Agile Framework, Large-Scale Scrum, Disciplined Agile Delivery, recipes for agile governance, and even Scale Professional Scrum. However, today, the Scaled Agile Framework is emerging as the dominant market leader. As agile thinking continues to proliferate throughout the early 21st century, it's finally becoming clear that none of this would be possible without agile leadership at all levels of the organization. Thus, a family of models is emerging to help us with this, such as Augustine's agile leadership model, Pink's employee leadership model, Denning's radical leadership model, the lean leadership model, and even leadership 3.0. Today, Scrum is in use by over 95% of global IT projects for applying agile, principles, practices, values, and thinkings at the project level, which consist of a product backlog of high priority project requirements, a sprint plan for the next 2 to 3 weeks worth of scope, the actual, iteration itself, daily scrums to report what you've done, and of course, at the end of the iteration, you'll show your customer what you've done and do an iteration process improvement cycle. The first basic ceremony in the Scrum paradigm is the notion of sprint planning. That is, a product owner comes in with a backlog of high priority requirements which have been established beforehand. Then the team gets together to examine these requirements, and they agree on which requirements can be done in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and they decompose those into tasks, they clarify them, and they come up with a sprint goal and a plan of action. Once the sprint begins, the next major Scrum ceremony is a daily stand-up meeting, which is only 15 minutes, where all the members of the Scrum team get together to answer three basic questions. What did they do since the last meeting, since the prior day? What do they plan to do before the next meeting or the next day? And what are their obstacles that need to be resolved? And of course, they'll have a sprint backlog of user stories, and what they'll try to do is burn these down and accomplish these by the end of the sprint. During the sprint, Scrum teams will completely analyze, design, code, test, and validate all high-priority user stories they agreed with the product owner to do in the next 2 to 3 weeks. At the end of that 2 to 3 week sprint, they will hold a 2 to 4 hour sprint review meeting with their customer to illustrate the goal of the sprint, what user stories were attempted, what were actually implemented, and get the customer's feedback on the quality of the sprint. The final Scrum ceremony performed by the team is the sprint retrospective, which is the secret sauce of the Agile paradigm. But this is only 1 or 2 hours, and every 2 to 3 weeks, what they'll do is they'll basically ask themselves what worked well, what didn't work well, and what needs to change. And thus, every 2 to 3 weeks, they will be improving their performance by orders of magnitude. This slide illustrates some basic Agile metric visualizations, such as burn down charts to show how quickly you're actually completing the user stories on the backlog, cumulative workflow diagrams to show essentially the same thing, how quickly the work is moving from the undone pile to the done pile, even simple Agile earned value management on story points, and even earned business value, because over 80% of the business value is in the first 20% of the requirements. This chart shows a simple taxonomy of Agile metrics from code or product metrics to basic project metrics of size, productivity, even basic Agile metrics such as story points, sprint burn down, release burn down, to some of the continuous delivery metrics of test coverage, the business value metrics like ROI, the team health metrics, and even the portfolio management metrics. But don't forget that two of the most important metrics are: is your team happy? That is their morale high? And is your customer satisfied and delighted? Those are the two most important metrics. This slide illustrates some of the basic costs and benefits of Agile methods. One study showed that the use of Agile methods actually reduced costs by nearly 61%. Not only that, but Agile projects had fewer people for the same amount of scope. And in this study, of these Agile projects, they were about 25% faster, but surprisingly, their quality was over 10 times better. Here's another study of the return on investment of Agile methods. And in this study, based on cost and benefits, the benefit to cost ratio was over a 7 to 1, with nearly a 600% return on investment. And once you begin some of the advanced continuous integration and delivery practices, the benefits and the return on investment actually increased sharply. Using modern paradigms such as continuous integration, continuous delivery, and even DevOps, we've basically been able to flip the cost of quality upside down, increasing the return on investment sharply, as we'll see in the next few slides, fractionalizing the cost of quality and reducing the lead and cycle times quite substantially over the use of both traditional methods and even basic Agile methods. We see some of these results in this Hewlett-Packard case study of continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps, where they reduced their build time to about 3 hours, doing about 10 to 15 builds per day, increasing their feedback cycle substantially. But most importantly, what they did was they fractionalized their cost of quality development costs, and they freed up 80% of the resources, to go back in terms of revenues, profits, and even new product development. Using modern Agile paradigms such as continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps, you're actually able to substantially reduce your lead and cycle times and do multiple releases per day. In the cases of Assemble and Facebook, you're doing up to 50 releases per month. Google's doing hundreds of millions of tests per day, and Amazon is doing hundreds of thousands of releases per day. And using these practices, you're 100 to several thousand times faster than public sector projects. Here's an interesting Agile case study by Blackboard. When they integrated all of their products and services into one massive code base, their productivity came to a screeching halt and their quality went out the window. But when they implemented continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps and disaggregated their code base into microservices, what happened was their productivity and their quality increased, but their cost of quality decreased, and they were actually able to return some of their development costs back to innovation. Here's yet another interesting Agile case study by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security where using continuous improvement, they were actually able to decrease their delivery times from about 180 days to 45 days using Agile methods, 30 days Kanban, and then finally using DevOps to about 1 to 3 days, also reducing the number of artifacts as well as gate reviews. And then they did this over a fairly short period of time. Throughout this briefing, we've emphasized several concepts such as total agile thinking at the organizational level, continuous integration, continuous delivery, DevOps. And this is an interesting study by DevOps Research, which shows when you do these things, implement DevOps at the organizational level, you still see tens of millions of dollars in benefits for a small number of costs, an immense ROI, and most surprisingly, a very, very short payback period. Contrary to the Standish study we saw at the beginning of this presentation today, showing that 70 to 80% of all projects are either challenged or failing due to immense scale, scope, and size, Standish has also shown when you use Agile methods, you actually increase your success rate by over 50% and you decrease your failure rate. And obviously, when you engage total Agile thinking at the organizational level, such as we saw in the previous slide, these benefits increase even more. Some of these organizational benefits, as illustrated in this MIT study, are as you have 6% better earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation, 4% better return on equity, 8% better return on assets, and 14% better ROI. But most importantly, your earnings are 36% better, and your revenues are 12% better as well. This is an interesting slide illustrating the demand for Agile professionals in the public sectors has grown over a very short period of time by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, but it also shows that agility is linked to national productivity. That is, nations that use Agile methods in high-tech industries actually have better GDP and GNP as opposed to their manufacturing or even agricultural counterparts. And even recent studies show that over 80% of public sector projects now use Agile methods. As we mentioned throughout today's presentation, over 95% of global IT projects now use Scrum, at least at the team level, and other studies show that they use scaled Agile framework at the portfolio or the enterprise level. Growing practices also include Kanban, continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps. This is an interesting study that shows the proliferation of Agile methods. Obviously, today there are over 500,000 certified Scrum Masters, or over 200,000 certified scaled Agile framework professionals, and the heat map on the right shows the states where Agile methods is most dominant, such as the West Coast, obviously the Boston area, the Midwest, even the Mid-Atlantic, and Florida as well. So let's go ahead and begin wrapping up, with an Agile methods summary. Agile methods don't mean deliver it now and fix it later. They mean do it right the first time. We will reduce your cost, your risk, and your waste while we improve the quality. And we do that with early feedback, focused resources. We simplify the scope, into manageable pieces with lots of collaboration and knowledge transfer and early, verification and validation. Let's close with a rather infamous quote by Charles Darwin, which he stated over 200 years ago. He said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And we find these principles still apply in the 21st century as General Stanley McChrystal's book, Team of Team States, even in high-performance teams such as Navy SEALs, these principles still apply. Thank you for joining me here today. Please visit my website, davidfrico.com, to learn more about me, get my white papers, my free videos on how to apply some of these principles to large and complex projects. Thank you very much for joining me here today.